So this last session examines the strategic importance of becoming increasingly sustainable in our operations and the Royal Air Force's ambition in achieving its target of net zero 40. It also really does highlight, I hope it will anyway, the unique achievements of our Global Air Chiefs Climate Change Collaboration Declaration of Intention. We're going to be talking about that as well. Great to see that being marked a little earlier. Also, this session is going to examine the criticality of developing and retaining key strategic skills required by our personnel and organisations for sustaining the next generation of air and space forces. So please welcome to the panel. I am delighted to welcome here on stage Air Marshal Sir Rich Knighton, who's Deputy Commander Capability and People and Air Member for Personnel. Great to have you with us. Also Lynda McVay, who's Director Skills and Capability at Leonardo UK. Welcome, Lynda. Jay Williams, Head of Fuel Systems Integration for Airbus. Welcome. And also Honorary Group Captain Kevin Billings from 601 Squadron. Great to have you with us, who's also Climate Change Collaboration, and you're going to be also speaking about the Declaration of Intention. So it's really great to hear all about the coordination of this intention, because I know you've been working really hard on that. So thanks for that. So first of all, Air Marshal, thank you for your presentation.
Thanks very much. Air Chiefs, friends, good afternoon. It is great to be back. Great to be back for me in the heart of the Air Force, and great to be back amongst so many old friends. My role here today is to introduce this session on sustainability. Sustainability from an environmental perspective and sustainability from a skills perspective. As the Chief of Air Staff said, he has eaten a few of my sandwiches. I'd go as far as to say he's eaten my sandwiches, my apple, my banana and my yoghurt. But I've only got 5 minutes, so I'm sure that will be okay. Now, some of you will remember at the end of yesterday, the final question, which was around sustainability. And the question was, are our targets, are our objectives realistic, and is it worthwhile? And that is literally what this session is about today. You've seen the signing of the Global Air Chiefs Climate Change Declaration, and Kevin will talk a little bit more about that. And doing it with our friends and with our allies is important, because it is only through working with others that we will deliver the change that we need. The question of is it important, I think, is a good one for us to consider. Why is it worthwhile? I think there is both a moral and a practical case for us driving to support our governments in delivering net zero commitments and supporting the battle against climate change. There's a moral case because it is fundamentally about security. It's about human security around the world. And it affects all of us. For those of us in the UK government has committed to making the country net zero by 2050 and is expecting defence and the Air Force within defence to play its part. But we also know practically that climate change is going to lead to increased instability. We're going to need to use our armed forces in different places to do different things to that which we've done in the past. And we also know that our capability isn't going to work as effectively in a climate change affected world. So there is, I think, it is worthwhile that we focus on sustainability, because there is a moral and a practical case. And for air forces, I think we can show leadership. Our history of all of our air forces is littered with examples of air forces being out in front in the application of technology. We can catalyse some of the change and innovation that's required right across industry and society. So the question of whether it's realistic, well, that maybe is a bit harder. I'm an optimist. I'm optimistic about humankind and the innovation that we will be able to deliver. We've set ourselves some pretty ambitious targets. You've heard that the Royal Air Force is committed to being net zero by 2040. I heard yesterday Northrop Grumman are committed to making the company net zero for scope 1 and 2 emissions by 2035. Those targets have a galvanizing effect. They provide focus for all of us. But some of the technology that's going to deliver that hasn't been invented yet. So our focus now must be on delivery. How are we going to deliver on these targets? We know the sources of our carbon footprint. They are from our infrastructure, from our operations. And it's here where we will apply technology and new thinking to help us deliver on those objectives. And Jay will talk a little bit about that later around aviation fuel. And we need to be realistic about our opportunities for carbon capture and for sequestration. A moss wall at RAF Leeming isn't going to cut it. But what we can do with our focus and our energy is catalyse industry and leverage off the scale that the commercial sector is actually going to deliver for us. So the other part of this session today is talk about people and skills and sustaining those skills. I'm excited about the world that Will Roper described yesterday morning, a world in which technology is creating technology. But I can tell you that all of my years of experience tell me that everything we do is delivered through and by people. And if we don't have people with the right talent, with the right skills, who want to be part of the Air Force, we will lose. And let me give you one small example about this competition and why we need to be better. In the UK, the engineering workforce is made up of about 16.5% women. If we're going to deliver on our objectives to raise those coming into the Air Force to 40% women by 2030, we are going to have to be twice or 3 times more attractive as an organisation to work for than the rest of industry. And that is our challenge. My view is we have to think about this on an enterprise basis. It's not just about the Air Force and those of us in uniform, and think about how we are going to deliver military capability and air and space power throughout the whole of that enterprise, whether that be industry or the armed forces, government and private sector. And Lynda will talk about that in her presentation. So I look forward to what my panelists have to say, and I look forward to the questions you're going to ask later. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be asked to speak here today. Good afternoon. The UK defence sector is characterised by the intellect, skills and passion of its people to provide the best products, technologies and services to the end users and to deploy them in the best interests of our country, our values and our allies. And we are rightly proud of this heritage and the capability this brings to the UK. Industry and the armed forces in the UK have long recognised the value of our people and provide excellent opportunities in employment and conditions and the ability to develop. We also do everything we can to attract and retain the skilled talent that we need to sustain our aims. Indeed, during the recent pandemic, the defence sector fared better than other sectors, continuing to work and to deliver for our customers throughout. However, an unfortunate confluence of circumstances means that the ability to maintain the skills levels we need is becoming increasingly difficult, and I will touch on some of those unfortunate circumstances. So first, the issue of demographics. It's well recognised that the UK has an ageing workforce. This brings both opportunities and problems. At the entry level, the number of young people leaving education with suitable qualifications to work in STEM-related roles, which is where our demand largely is, does not meet the current and growing demand for those skills across a number of sectors that rely on engineering, manufacturing, and technical capability. Indeed, an IET report in November 2021 states the shortfall to be 170,000. One factor is the drop in the birth rate in the UK over a number of years, which impacts potential new recruits coming through education, and this will be felt for some years to come. Within education, the current rate of uptake of appropriate STEM study subjects, both at school and in further and higher education, cannot meet the demand that already exists for those skills, a demand which continues to grow as industry becomes increasingly digital and technically enabled. So we face in that environment an issue of attraction. On top of the shortage of suitable potential recruits is the likelihood of those young people to be attracted to a career in our sector, in the defence sector. Despite the concerted efforts of the individual armed forces, the companies associated with the sector and other bodies, defence may not be an obvious or attractive option for some young people. A recent feed into the DSF skills group, of which I'm a co-chair, stated that there are populations which would simply never consider a career in defence, whether due to their ethnicity, a lack of role models and information, of course, and gender. If we fail to address this, we are accepting the loss of swathes of the population to our sector and reducing the likelihood of our success. So when we talk about social value, this is critical. These are the people that risk being overlooked, that we have yet to fully tap into and support. We know that young people begin to shape their career from the age of 9 to 11 for boys, 8 to 10 for girls. Without a role model at home or a well-informed teacher, however, the opportunity to engage with engineering is easily lost. My company, Leonardo, conducts outreach into schools in socially deprived areas where our apprentices and graduates can act as relatable role models, which allows children to begin to visualize themselves as potential engineers and technicians. And we're not alone. There's a vast array of STEM outreach activity across the UK, all aiming to increase the number of potential recruits to the sector. But efforts are largely fragmented, either geographically or organisationally. A recent study by the IMechE found that 47% of 11 to 19-year-olds still know little or almost nothing about what engineers do. And there has been a 31% decline in those opting to study engineering at GCSE. Even after an appropriate STEM qualification, however, the pipeline of potential recruits drops dramatically. Only 31% of women with STEM degrees actually choose to work in STEM roles. And overall, only 24% of the population with STEM qualifications will be in a related job 6 months after graduation. Further, 29% of the LGBT community consciously choose not to have a career in STEM due to worries about discrimination. Young people with STEM capability are in demand, and it's a buyer's market, with unemployment sitting at 3.7% in May this year, meaning there are more job vacancies than unemployed people for the first time since records began. So we face an issue of perception. Young people are less motivated by the offering of a job for life than one in which they can grow and learn. They care less about attractive pensions and more about taking responsibility and making a difference to society and their environment. Careers are increasingly varied and core transferable skills are valued. In our sector, deep expertise may take years to acquire and exist only within our sector. Indeed, we employ some of the world's experts in the technologies that underpin our success. We know that we can and we do offer fulfilling careers that are very much aligned to the aspirations of young people, But for various reasons, the perception does not always match the reality, and the opportunities for exciting, groundbreaking work of real value to our communities may go unnoticed. Then there is the issue of skills currency. At the opposite end of the demographic spectrum, our sector enjoys the long-term loyalty of many of our workers. So we have many older people in our workforce. My company, for example, average length of service is well over 20 years. This is a huge benefit because it allows us to retain those with the hard-earned expertise we rely on. However, with current rates of change, due to the factors such as the Fourth Industrial Revolution and future in digital technological advancement, this can also lead to a problem with skills currency. The World Economic Forum has shown that when compared with previous industrial revolutions, this one is evolving at an exponential rather than a linear pace. So previous practices to keep our workforce current are just not sufficient. If we are to secure the maximum benefit from our aging workforce, they and we must be ready and willing to reskill, upskill, and in some cases reinvent many times in a career as a matter of course. If we are to secure the maximum benefit, the issue of productivity. The ONS report from 2020, the last year for which data is available, shows the UK sitting at 5th place in the G7 for productivity, a situation which has persisted since the end of the last economic crisis in 2009. According to Engineering UK, while the causes of the UK's poor productivity record are contested, it is clear that simply hiring more workers will not be enough to achieve a step change. The productivity of existing employees also needs to be improved, both through investment in technology and skills and the strengthening of the educational pipeline. Any organization's productivity and hence ability to compete will depend on their ability to adopt new technologies and a systematic approach to upskilling and reskilling today's workforce with these technologies and ways of working. Finally, the issue of Brexit. Whilst national security means that the defence sector generally cannot employ large numbers of non-UK nationals, Brexit has reduced the number from Europe available to other sectors requiring engineering and technical skills, thus forcing these employers to take more from the pool of UK nationals' engineering workforce. So we are impacted by Brexit. So where should we look for solutions? We need a strategic approach with greater coordination between employers, academia, and government across initiatives. The government's white paper on skills and post-16 education, published in January 2021, aims to address some of this, with a focus on local skills plans and greater employer involvement in setting the agenda for skills. And whilst welcome, this addresses these issues from the ground up only. A top-down vision of the future skills landscape would add longevity and allow us to plan for changes across sectors. Secondly, the Defence and Security Industrial Strategy did include the industrial base in consultation and recognise that a strong industrial base is reliant on having the right skills and talent across government, industry, and academia to ensure successful delivery of future defence and security capabilities, and this is very welcome. Third, the apprenticeship levy has distorted the skills development landscape without yet fully achieving the aims for which it was created. With a clear vision of long-term skills needs, this could help to support the drive towards filling those needs and achieve the government's ambition for high-skill, high-salary jobs. Fourth, concerted efforts must be made to raise the awareness of defence and engineering opportunities, educating and supporting teachers and careers guidance teachers and STEM coordinators. Next, lifelong learning, that term we've all heard for many, many years, must be the reality for all, with the infrastructure, the flexible modular learning and funding in place to achieve this. We must continually upskill and reskill our employees on an ongoing basis, building a portfolio of skills throughout their career. Finally, large organizations and primes must ensure that SMEs in their supply chains are not forgotten, but are also able to access the same opportunities to develop their people. So in conclusion, we talk about skills and sustainability. The sustainability of our sector relies entirely upon the knowledge, the skills, and the expertise of our people, and we must ensure that we have a coherent ecosystem, produce the intellect and capability that we need to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you for welcoming me here today, and also a big thank you to your leadership that's been shown today with the signing of this intention for collaboration, which Kevin's going to speak about today. Rich hinted strongly that to meet those aggressive sustainability targets, we're going to need collaboration, and in fact, cross-sector, cross-industry collaboration. So that will be driven in part, at least, by some of the advances made in commercial aviation, and that's hopefully an insight that I can provide today from an Airbus perspective of how we're doing that in commercial aviation and with our military peers and family, and then a focus also on sustainable fuels, about how that's going to be a measure to get us to those targets. So, So Airbus are taking a lead in this industry action plan. There are many aspects that we've got to progress in parallel, and many that we've got to accelerate and even explore the technology to meet these aggressive targets. For commercial aviation, that's net zero by 2050 globally. We're accelerating and pioneering in many of these topics, and I'm going to give you a brief rundown of those just now. So an element that isn't directly transferable to the military realm is market-based measures. So for in commercial aviation, that's using certified carbon offsetting schemes to cap the emissions at a 2020 level, using emission schemes such as Corsia and the European Trading Scheme. So while offsets are a valid measure for commercial aviation, myself as an engineer are passionate about the use of technology to mitigate these needs of having these market-based measures, and at worst, mitigating market demand decline. So for us, this is looking at efficiency in fuel and a fuel type and emission type. The same can be said for military operations. Clearly, more time in the sim could be a measure to get you down to your decarbonisation targets. But with everything we've heard today and the last 2 days, that isn't to be relied upon with the real training, real exercises, and real missions that we need to conduct to continue to be at the leading edge of air power. So considering aircraft technology and design, we're talking about fleet replacement. We're talking about the latest generation of aircraft, be that in commercial or in military, looking at weight savings, aerodynamic efficiencies, specific fuel consumption opportunities. In commercial, where our scope 3, our CO2 emissions from the use of our products, is 99% of our carbon footprint through its life as Airbus, upgrading our fleet to the latest generation of aircraft globally is a real big lever. If you think of those products today being 20% more fuel efficient than the aircraft they replace. For aircraft operations and air traffic management, we're talking about the efficiency of getting from point A to B, be that optimizing climb trajectories, descent trajectories, hold patterns, air traffic management, and diversions. We're also looking at the means to optimize air traffic management in cruise. So you can see the graphic of our fellow fly demonstration last year, where we used the preferential wake vortex of the lead aircraft to offer a drag reduction to the following aircraft in the same way that geese fly in a V. So those opportunities are all incrementally developing the air traffic management of the future to reduce the carbon footprint of our operations. Similarly, on ground, we're talking about taxiing efficiency, we're talking about turnaround time optimization, and we're talking about alternative ground power. So can we have hybrid or electric or hydrogen-powered ground infrastructure? And then we come to potentially the most exciting topic, certainly for me working in Airbus Commercial, is a zero emissions program looking at hydrogen. So the 3 concept study aircraft of the zero emissions program are there on the slide. And the real goal here is to have hydrogen-powered aircraft through direct burn or a fuel cell to have only water vapor as its emission characteristics. Using such a light and energy-rich fuel is a huge opportunity, but it comes with big technological challenges. We're talking about using fuel as a liquid hydrogen at 20 Kelvin, and all of the cryogenic system development, power plant consumption, thermal management that involves at aircraft level. The technology challenge isn't new. If we look back to the US and Lockheed and Project Suntan doing this in the 50s in the US. But to think about doing this to a global fleet of aircraft with a high production rate, we're going to need to revolutionize the ground infrastructure and regulatory framework to move to this new fuel type. Last but not least, I wanted to talk about sustainable aviation fuel today. Why? Well, in many of the different projections, you can argue about the contribution that each of these measures is going to have on the route to net zero, but SAF is by far the biggest single lever, at least to get to the 2050 target. That's why it's so important and vital that we discuss it today. The importance of SAF is that it's already compatible with today's aircraft, Airbus fleets, other fleets. You can already operate with up to a 50% blend of sustainable fuels with kerosene to keep it within the Jet A characteristics. So the specification of fuel that we use today, we can blend SAFs up to 50% depending on the fuel type, and the aircraft's good to go. So that is why it's one of the scenes, the biggest lever in the short term. Having said that, if we're already compatible as an aircraft and we've got government will, why aren't we there? Well, similarly to the hydrogen challenge, we're talking about an infrastructure challenge, a fuel production challenge to reconvert refineries to produce these biofuels or synthetic fuels. And the production ramp up of those fuels is what's going to be vital to get us all to our targets for sustainability. So what is Airbus doing in this arena to accelerate the benefits from these sustainable fuels? This picture helps illustrate this. This is a flight trial that we did last year with an A350, a commercial airline, but chased by a Falcon jet with special sensors. And we're looking at the emissions profile of 100% SAF, so fully unblended biofuels in this instance, to look at the emissions characteristics because we think it's going to have a higher environmental benefit than the current blended approach. Why is that? Well, one of the characteristics of SAF is its lower aromatic content. Without taking you to a chemistry lesson, these more complex carbon molecules in the fuel, when burnt, can contribute to particulate emissions, and these particles can seed contrail developments and ultimately cirrus clouds. So contrails, due to their influence on radiative forcing, can be a big power towards climate change, and it's an element that we're wanting to investigate and explore, and of course exploit now with having zero aromatic fuels in the shape of these 100% SAFs. So the climate opportunity is stronger if we don't blend, but also if we go to a specification outside of today's fuel type, the hope is that we're going to encourage more fuel producers, more fuel production pathways, and have more feasible and viable commercial opportunities to produce fuel for the market. And so it's another big driver to go outside of this fuel specification that we have today. So some of these fuels will be made from biomass, so forestry residues, municipal waste, used cooking oils, but others will be directly synthetically made. A synthetic sustainable fuel, for example, could take direct air carbon capture, so to take CO2 from the air, take green hydrogen, so low carbon electrolytically produced hydrogen, and blend them to make a fuel, the so-called power to liquid fuel. The interest there is the scalability of that approach. If you can imagine having the synergies with the liquid hydrogen production that I've already talked about for our future aircraft, we're going to need green hydrogen. If we talk about offsetting, carbon capture is a viable means for that as well. So the synergies in infrastructure investment for these types of fuels is also really exciting. I'd like to congratulate as well the RF on the Project Martin, which is another step towards demonstrating the use of these synthetic fuels. The added attraction from a nation's and a security and a defence perspective in broadening the range of these fuels that could be made is, as already been mentioned, a potential for more secure and more decentralized fuel production, giving security to either remote production or local production. And that's something that we're very aware of from the fuel strategy that we're trying to take at Airbus. So fuels are controlled through various standards. We're working very closely with the ASTM. We're co-chairing a task force with Rolls-Royce, plus many of the valued other panel members, to develop a new specification for a fuel type outside of Jet A, outside of JP8, that looks to balance the increased environmental benefits in terms of emission profile, the ability to ramp up production to meaningful volumes, and then also, of course, the aircraft compatibility constraints, because there will be changes in the way that this fuel behaves, both on our aircraft and in the ground infrastructure. So we're busy with flight testing, with supplier studies, and from a commercial perspective, we are targeting to have all of our fleet cleared for 100% SAF by 2030. And of course, this learning will be shared across all of our military aircraft in due course. Many of the technologies and constraints and compatibility issues that we have will be common challenges, and we're there to work across those industries. So what's the role for air forces in this journey? Well, we've heard before around the ability for innovation, for collaboration. And as leaders, we need you to continue that journey, to give a strength of voice to this topic, to be early adopters, to innovate, to collaborate, and to influence governments and fuel producers in their mandates to ramp up production. Thanks very much.
Thank you. First of all, it was so rewarding and gratifying to see all of the air chiefs up here today taking their pictures. It is a culmination of a vision that Sir Mike had a year ago when he sent out a letter to all of you saying, this is a hard challenge and we can't do it alone. And can we come together and bring the best ideas, lessons learned, and best practices together? And you all have done it. We have had over 50 nations participate in one way or another in the Global Air Force's climate change collaboration. We have built a virtual, persistent workspace to bring together the globally distributed teams based on the Bluescape software that they have so generously donated to the collaboration. That allowed us to work to bring together the Declaration of Intention. And I think, as everybody knows, getting something like that, getting a consensus, we sent out a consensus document a year ago, and getting everybody to agree on it was a terrific challenge. And thanks to the Bluescape software, we were able to do that very quickly. But I think what it does more than anything else, it reinforces the idea that free nations of the world, when we're faced with a challenge, come together and address that challenge in one way or another. And as Sir Rich said, it's usually the Air Forces who lead that way, who lead in doing that. If you go back throughout history, you'll see that Air Forces have been at the front edge of inspiring technology to move forward. And one of the things I want to address, I had a whole speech with really great visuals and everything, but I wanted to address some of the things that we've heard this week, and not be pedantic and not go over things, because we've had a lot of really good discussions. But one of the questions that keeps coming up is the idea of, is this really important? And I think everybody understands, number one, that it is, and all of the threats that we have, but it is really a physics challenge. The hotter and more humid the air gets, the thinner it gets. And that stress, that limits our ability to have payloads, it stresses our engines, and it stresses our capabilities to plan, because the air is just thinner. And if we don't mitigate the risk, if we don't deter things the way we would deter any other enemy, we're going to be behind the curve when we really need to be there. So again, this collaboration, by bringing our ideas together and sharing best practices, is really helpful. We've had 2 Deputy Air Chiefs meetings, one last October here in London, and one in March that we held in Rome. And General Goretti, thank you so much for the hospitality and the good work of your team. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be where we are today. So thank you, and thank you for your team. We've built out 4 working groups, and we have others in play. The United States Air Force led the very first working group on operations and mission planning and is organizing another working group meeting for this fall. The Italian Air Force is leading our infrastructure working group. We had a meeting in March, and they'll be hosting a meeting in the fall in Verona. The Canadian Air Force is leading a mitigation working group. And Canada is uniquely qualified to be looking at this. They're dealing with sea level rise, they're dealing with earthquakes, they're dealing with fires that all affect encroachment. One of the things that they're dealing with that I didn't know about until they told me was they're dealing with new migration patterns of endangered mammals, which is affecting their ability to train in different places. So those ideas and those challenges can be shared with all the other air forces. The RAF is going to be standing up a fuels working group so that we can work on the SAF issues and the things that we've been working on there. And it's been tremendously valuable. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was in Tokyo and met with Kokujetai and General Sakanashi and his A5 team. And they are very advanced in their thinking and a key part of the Japan Ministry of Defense Climate Change Working Group. And General Izutsu, thank you so much for all your hospitality and your leadership. But the key takeaways from what we've done in the collaboration have been 2 things. Number 1, the collaboration is valuable. And number 2, and probably number 1, and this is something that's been reiterated by every Air Force that's been part of this, is that nothing we do in the collaboration can affect and negatively affect our ability to deliver combat effectiveness. And what's really good about that is as we look and we turn the prism on combat effectiveness, putting a carbon lens on it can actually be a force multiplier. If we look at these, and the United States Air Force has been has actually demonstrated that by doing advanced planning and analytics. In their tanker fleet alone, they have been able to reduce their carbon output by 4 million pounds a week. And that has allowed them to do better planning, to be more combat effective and more lethal, and to have a better control of their supply chain. And that is also, and it's also been delivering a carbon output that is good for the world. As we talked about things this week, and you heard people talking about artificial intelligence, and talking about machine learning. As we take humans out of the loop, we will be reducing our carbon footprint, and we will be shortening kill chains. And that they can, if we really turn the prism on what our carbon future looks like, we can again become more carbon friendly and more lethal, and we will be deterring the threat that is, in terms of our future, an existential threat and a shared challenge that we all have. It's probably the shaping challenge of our generation. So as we look at things like that, you could have a counter-UAS system that has humans disambiguating birds from drones and horses from trucks. But if you can do that at the edge by using advanced computing capabilities, you can reduce the carbon output from a system that delivers the same condition-based output that you want with perhaps 4 people instead of 20 people. And that frees up folks to do other combat missions or to be more effective somewhere else. Also, going back to the analytics, the more we can drive advanced analytics in looking at how we do our planning, how we do our mission capability studies, we will become more effective. The example that I used with the United States Air Force just recently was driven by a small company called Lone Star who did the analytics. They took incomplete and disjointed data, were able to analyze that and come up with a mission planning system and a fuel use system that not only allowed for more combat capability, but did a job that we really need to deal with in terms of carbon. So I'm going to get off the stage so we can get to the talks that we need to do, but as General Brown says, we need to accelerate change or lose, and that gets to both carbon, our acquisition processes, and our thoughts about how we move forward. So again, thank you all for signing the collaboration. It is a historic event, and it was great seeing everybody up here. And Sir Mike, thank you for your leadership on this.
Kevin, Billings, thank you very much, and thank you all for the presentation. So let's dive a little bit deeper now with some of the questions that have already come through from the audience. Ian Toff says, the net zero ambitions are laudable and essential. General Brown says that air forces always want more equipment and budgets are tight. So given this, how will the RAF and other air forces fund the sustainability requirements without sacrificing core capabilities?
Shall I start?
Yes, please.
And I saw Ian at lunch break, so I knew he was going to ask that question. So I had a few minutes to think about it. So, I mean, my answer to Ian was that if you look at what defence in the UK is going to spend over the next decade, we're going to spend £500 billion on defence. Nearly half of that is going to be on equipment and equipment support. So as we modernise our equipment, we have to modernise that equipment in the context of our sustainability objectives. The same applies to our infrastructure. As we invest in infrastructure, that's where we must do so and think about how we're going to deliver a net zero capability from that infrastructure as we build new. There are some difficult choices ahead, though, I think, because we are going to have to make judgments about the relative balance of investment to support the delivery of the government's net zero 50 target alongside modernisation and sustainment of the equipment that we already have. And it's those difficult choices where we need to apply that technology that we've described that isn't actually yet in existence that's going to help us to drive through and support the delivery of that over time. So it won't be straightforward, but it's about applying the very large amounts of money that we're already planning to spend and then deciding where our investment will be most usefully placed in order to support both our operational outputs and our sustainability goals.
Okay, thank you. Kevin Billings, it's clearly a huge achievement, the signing this declaration of intent. But it's a declaration of intent, isn't it? That there will be differing speeds, really, that different nations can actually pursue in pursuit of this goal.
That's actually correct, because one of the things that I see and we've seen out of the collaboration is we think of this as more of a constellation than a pyramid. The idea that nations can come together to address specific issues that are relevant to them and may not be relevant to other folks. And that's what the RAF is doing, is we're bringing these working groups together, and people may want to participate in them. It may be irrelevant to other folks, but what it does is it provides an entity and a catalyst to bring these ideas together. And everybody's moving at their own pace. But if we share ideas and we share best practices, we will be able to move everybody along a little bit faster. And that's what the real goal of the collaboration is. We're, like I say, we're going to be having another deputies meeting this fall. We're looking at a place to do that. We're setting up other working groups. And next year, we're working with Riyadh to establish, we're going to have a working group summit at Riyadh and a joint briefing for the air chiefs next year. So this is a project that is going to continue.
Thank you. And Jay Williams, just how useful is it to have this declaration of intent, given obviously the policies that are taken by air forces around the world, are going to be instrumental in terms of future demand for your aircraft?
Absolutely. I think to have the consolidation of that intent globally or with so many nations is echoing really what the commercial sector needs to achieve because of its national targets. And I see the Air Force as being a real power for that innovation and collaboration to pull on those same fleet level opportunities. We talk about trying to make these benefits available to all. And I think some of the collaboration around how we use the product rather than just a platform investment, some of the operations questions, could be transferable. And we think we need to share those once we've succeeded in them.
There's always a lot of talk, particularly this political sphere, about different governments potentially reneging on some climate change commitments. Do you, though, still feel as though, given the commitments that have been made by the private sector in particular, that you will continue nonetheless, just even if the political colours change?
We talk a lot around both stick and carrot from a political perspective, so mandates, but also levies and taxation breaks. But really, if we're talking about public perception, there's a real risk that society won't accept us not to move. And I think that's both on the case of users, but also shareholders in the commercial realm. So I think policy is a huge lever to accelerate, but I think the direction of travel is set, really.
Marshal?
Just a couple of points. So I would say over the last 3 to 5 years, I've seen a profound shift in the conversation in industry, but the defence sector in particular, where this is now part of their core policy and is recognised actually as a mechanism that, by which, or without it, they will not be able to attract investment. The Association of Defence Suppliers, ADS in the UK, did some work recently where they concluded if they were unable to shift the perception of the defence sector and were able to get after some of these sustainability questions, they simply wouldn't be able to attract either equity or capital to enable them to modernise. So I think the scene, almost irrespective of the political changes, is set in a way that I'm not sure I expected 5 years ago. So I'm optimistic.
And Lynda McVay, this really does as well feed into this fight for talent, isn't it? Because if the sector is seen to be moving in this direction, do you think it will make it easier to recruit for those key roles that we're currently facing such shortfalls for?
Yes, I think so. And I think we need to make sure that the message actually reaches young people and those who influence and guide them about what our sector actually is and what it is not. And certainly if we can show a commitment and demonstrate action against our environmental targets, then I think that plays into what young people are concerned about, what they want to know about, and how they feel they can contribute. So I don't think we have the choice to backslide on this. It's got a momentum.
And Jay, would you say that's the same within your organisation as well? That actually, in terms of recruitment, you're seeing a lot more interest into these new areas of engineering?
Absolutely. As leading a team of engineers in the UK, you see the competition of people going to develop wind turbines or offshore or other energy sources, and so we have to communicate about the longer term ambition. Right now, today, we know where we are, and we're open about that as a climate impact. But being credible and honest around the challenge that's there is exciting, and it should attract the right level of capability and talent, because some of the challenges that are ahead of us are pretty revolutionary, really.
So there's a question which has come in. How does your organisation plan to mitigate the skills shortage by maximising the available talent? For example, more partnerships, better use of supply chains. Jay, could you take that one first of all?
So I think much as we've said about collaboration across both defence and commercial, I think broadening that for the challenge of the new fuel topics is there. And we're seeing the opportunity to collaborate and the need to collaborate across sector. So with space power, but also then automotive and even ground infrastructure. So on the topic of hydrogen and fuels, I think if the talent isn't coming to you, you've got to go and find it. And I think certainly the breadth of opportunity to collaborate wider is really upon us now.
And what potential synergies, this is another question, that might exist between air forces and the engineering sector? What are they, and how might these be exploited better? Would you say, Kevin, could you take that one?
I think that's a really good question, because one, I think, especially as we look at, again, it's been talked about all week, machine learning, artificial intelligence, how we look at that and integrate that into our thinking overall about the life cycle of our systems, and also how do we build life cycle systems that are carbon friendly, and again, bringing back, making us more combat effective. The idea is we develop 6th generation aircraft, we need to avoid having the elongated hub and spoke supply chain systems, which both limit your ability to fly and fight because a part may be, halfway around the world, and also what it does is that part to go halfway around the world has a big carbon footprint. So we can become more effective as we build sixth generation systems is looking at our overall supply chain, our overall repair systems, bringing those closer together, making them more capable to do that. One of the ways we can do that probably most effectively is by additive manufacturing, getting the licenses and the tools to be able to do additive manufacturing close to where you're doing repairs is going to get airplanes back in the sky faster, which is going to deliver more capability and be more carbon friendly.
Let me move to another question now, which has come in about, can the RAF meet sustainability goals by taking a risk-adverse approach? So wait for technologies to be proven in the commercial sector first. But what risks does that present, Marshal?
I think the challenge is so big that if the Air Force or broader industry takes a risk-averse approach, then we will be too slow. I've stood on the stage in the past at these conferences and talked about how we innovate and how we create the culture that preserves both the benefits of a risk-based approach to managing safety, but doesn't allow that to stifle innovation. And the challenge here for us is to innovate in a manner which will deliver the outcome we want without placing our people at unnecessary risk. And that requires us, I think, to do exactly the sorts of things that have been done already in the Air Force with the kinds of trials that we've described in order to demonstrate what's feasible, to catalyse the kind of innovation that's required in the commercial sector. But let's be honest, the consumption of fuel by the Air Force is a fraction of the consumption of fuel by the civil aviation industry. The reduction in cost is going to come from the scale that's offered by the private sector. In the same way with photovoltaics, that cost reduction occurred because it became adopted in a much wider way, and that's where we'll need to benefit from it.
And as we saw from your slide, Jay, obviously this is you're doing this continuously for both sectors.
Yeah, and I think there's a balance to be struck around the urgency of the scale of the problem for commercial aviation. But I do see that there's two elements for the defence side to be involved. One is around us as a resource of skill and technology that can really contribute both ways to the commercial challenge. But secondly is to get your place in the energy policy queue, because if we're talking about new fuel types, be it synthetic fuel or in the further future hydrogen, we need to have the whole picture described to government and to nations to understand how you're going to derive that new energy footprint for fuels. So I think those two elements are really important for both commercial and military.
And for me, I think government has got a part to play here as well, in that in the same way we're talking about the challenges of electric vehicle rollout across the country and the investment that's required in the infrastructure to support it. Jay alluded to the challenges around completely re-engineering our fuel distribution system for different types of fuel in the future. So the government will have a part to play in that as well as the private sector.
Mm-hmm.
I think also one of the things we need to look at is not taking and amortizing carbon-intensive technologies, baseline technologies that when we get to here and having to amortize that and looking at that investment as an investment to stimulate competition so that the private sector can come and bring in the 2.0, 3.0 type of changes in a way that adds value and also allows you to scale more quickly using private capital instead of more government money. So the investments that you make that in a baseline technology that may have improved carbon by 3% is if you can have the private sector come back with a new idea rapidly and be able to compete that over and over again, you will be able to bring more capability, become more carbon friendly, and have the government use the private capital that is out there in the private investment to drive those new ideas. And I think that's what we've got to leverage.
Lynda, it was interesting in the last session that we were talking about the void in terms of communication. Do you think the industry needs to work harder in communicating the progress that's being made so that you can attract the skills that you need?
Yes, and I think in our own ways, all of the organisations represented here today do a lot and have a degree of success. But I think we're doing a lot at a point at which sometimes it's too late. So the numbers, as I said, when you start to look at the funnel of numbers that are coming into the sector that we potentially could bring into our business. If you look at that number, it's quite clear that just simply aren't the numbers of young people going through the kind of education and then aspirations that we need for them to come to us. So not only do we have to compete, but I actually think we have to add to the pool. And that means doing more together, because at the point at which it's recruiting, we are in competition. But if we are looking at doing something collaboratively across the sector for young people to make sure that the messages are getting out early, then I think that's a much better way of using our strengths as a sector.
Mm-hmm. It's really fascinating about the collaboration. We've heard so much during this conference. Yeah. The collaboration is key on so many different levels. Another question has come through. The elephant in the room is China and Russia, who show no interest in carbon emissions reduction. Is our moral crusade towards net zero going to undermine our ability to win wars? So, Marshal, do you want to take that one?
A small question. First of all, never argue with the premise of the question, but I am. Actually, China's attitude towards climate change has changed significantly in the last decade. And I think there's a recognition of self-interest in China. I mean, at the heart of this is a question of whether we're going to compromise the delivery of our military capability in the pursuit of our objectives around sustainability. And I don't think we have to do that. I don't think it has to be a compromise. And indeed, as the Chief talked about, actually becoming less reliant on fossil fuels and the supply chain that comes with that could well drive agility and operational advantage for us. But I would also fall back on the moral argument, which is to link back to the previous panel. Part of our job as air forces is to defend the countries and defend our the things that we value. And if we value our planet and we value our ability to for our children and their children to live healthily and happily, then we must contribute to that. But I think it's a false dichotomy. I don't think we have to make the choice that we will compromise on our military capability just to deliver our sustainability objectives.
Well, staying at the wider picture, just briefly, we have a question from General Wiseman, Chief of the Air Staff in South Africa. This is a more general point, but he says every war has its own equilibrium. What is the envisaged equilibrium in Russia and the Russia-Ukraine war from the political and military perspectives? And what decisions do you think need to be made by NATO and allies and heads of states at political and military levels? That's a very wide question. Thank you very much, General. But just to get your take on it briefly.
Sure, and General, I'll be very happy to talk afterwards as well. So I think the short answer is we don't know right now. The UK government's position is very clear that Russia must be seen to fail and to lose. And for those who were listening to a report on the radio this morning, we had a former advisor of Zelensky's, a member of parliament, saying that they will not cede territory. But a war that runs on for many years and is hugely costly has challenges for both Ukraine and Russia, but also for the international community more generally. But right now, certainly from a UK perspective, our policy and position is that Russia must be seen to fail. We can't reward the aggression and the unprovoked attack that they made on another sovereign nation. And so that's where we will continue to drive for now. But history tells us that things change in war and things are unpredictable.
Obviously, there is a lot of pressure to up contributions to NATO's budgets, and at the same time, budgets are being squeezed, and there are more challenges when it comes to sustainable targets. This question has come in: how will we decide what we spend our budgets on? What are the key things that you can see that we will spend that equipment on improved budgets to be sustainable? I mean, where do you think the big decisions are going to have to be when it comes to budgets and what to spend on? Kevin, let me ask you.
Since I have absolutely no authority to make any of those decisions, I am actually going
I'd like to take your take. I know, I'm just trying to spread the questions around, but I'll ask you, Ed, Marshal, for your take on that. Just how tricky is it going to be going forward to make these very difficult decisions?
Yeah, and we touched on some of this earlier in the panel. So the first place we've got to look is infrastructure. So about a third of our carbon footprint is as a consequence of our infrastructure. The technology exists today to make our infrastructure net zero, or in fact net negative. And so we need to go after that first, and certainly our target in the Air Force is to do that in the very early part of the 2030s. And that will require us to spend some more money. I mean, as a rule of thumb, we look at about premium for net zero in infrastructure about 12%. Now, that's coming down all the time, and as industry get to grips with the new technology, I can see that will resolve itself. The biggest chunk of, or the biggest contributor to our carbon footprint is fuel, and it is the consumption of hydrocarbons. And so we're going to have to invest both in the kind of synthetic and sustainable aviation fuel that Jay's been describing, but also thinking about how do we make our vehicles more efficient. How do we drive down the consumption of our hydrocarbons? And this is a really good example of where I think if we exploit improvements in the synthetic environment and synthetic training, what we will be able to do is actually deliver capability as good as, or not, if not better than we can do today in the live environment, as well as reducing our carbon footprint. So I think infrastructure, synthetics, and actually how we improve efficiency and how we develop technology that will reduce our footprint will help us.
Just picking up on one of your points, waiting for industry to get to grips with new technology. That's a lot of onus on you, Jay, to do just that. And you can see from your slide about the juggle that you have pursuing all these different avenues at the same time. Just how challenging is that?
Well, it's a challenge that's not shied away from at company level in terms of our purpose. We want to pioneer sustainable aviation, so that challenge is tackled head on, and I think we are all learning about where the opportunities arise and keeping our eyes open. I think on some elements we're deep into the technology development themselves. In other areas, it's more about advocacy and support because we're not a fuel producer. But we need to, again, collaborate and have those messages spread across the industry. So I think it's a challenge that is well noted in terms of the level of investment that we put in, and I think other companies are, of course, following suit. But also, with R&T, you have to spend money to find out answers, and I think that's what we're doing, especially on the hydrogen side.
Okay, thank you. And Kevin, I'll end with a question that I know you're going to be able to answer. What do you see as the next steps? Now we've had the signing of this declaration of intent. What would you like to see happen now?
What I'm hoping to see is more nations putting people on our calls. I mean, we have had we've had up to 50 people different times on our calls, having subject matter experts from your air forces participating actively in the working groups, coming up with ideas, things that are going to add value to your air forces, bring to us, and we'll figure out how to integrate it and how to make that happen. The role of the Royal Air Force here is not to tell anybody how to do anything, but to be the catalyst to bring ideas together. We've built, as I said, a virtual mechanism that is persistent and live that you can go to and look at. You can share ideas. So what we're going to do is work really hard to bring people together and just pick up the phone and call us, and we'll be there. Well,
on that note, thank you very much. Thank you very much for being part of this panel today, the last panel of the day. So thank you.
Thanks.